Welcome to the Actualize Podcast. We have the opportunity here to have conversations with amazing leaders that are in the space of empowering youth, of inclusivity, of leadership generally, all the things that really serve to both inspire and enable youth to achieve their potential. So for everyone listening, Dr. Nicole Neil is an Associate Dean of Education, also an Associate Professor of Applied Psychology at Western University, also a registered behavior analyst. She's an award-winning researcher and educator who has really dedicated her career to practical solutions, which we are all about at Actua, practical solutions to support individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders and their families, such important work. So welcome again. And, this is really critical timing for this conversation because it's end of the school year. We're getting into summer program, summer camp season across the country. Kids are going to camps, kids are going to, out into community centers or to wherever that camps are being held. And parents are really sort of hoping for the best, hoping their kids have, positive experiences, that, they make friends, they feel good about it being summer, they, maybe learn some stuff. But as you know, and I certainly know this as the parent of, children who require accommodation, it's really tough for some parents. It's not just as easy as registering for summer camp and dropping them off with their lunch and, hoping for the best. So, we know, and we certainly know this at Actua, that so many of those programs are not necessarily set up or do not have the resources in place to support kids that need to have certain accommodations in the space or additional supports. I'm really happy to have the chance to talk to you about this topic in particular. I would love to just start by having you tell us about you, about the work that you do and the research that you're undertaking.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, such a great time for this kind of conversation and just of course a topic dear to my heart. So I'm a researcher, but my background, like you mentioned, I'm a registered behavior analyst, which is sort of a clinical training, and a lot of my work prior to some of the things I was doing here were providing direct supports, interventions to children and youth with autism, developmental disabilities, Down syndrome, with a focus on individuals who had some significant support needs around communication, behavior, and when I sort of took up my role in the Faculty of Education, I started thinking a little bit more broader, sort of going outside of the clinical space and thinking about how to support children in all different kinds of spaces, not just sort of giving the skills and sending them off into the world, but how do we make the world work for them as well. And so a lot of my research now is focusing on how do we support children and youth in community settings, in the spaces that they live and play and learn, and really trying to translate the things that we've learned from different clinical settings, from studies into actionable kinds of things that community organizations can take up.
So what are some of the practical changes that are, can be made so that, a child is feeling like they belong in a space? And again, there's the complexity of all the different programs, but there's also the complexity of every child's needs are different. A physical disability is very different than being, neurodiverse. So can you talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, that's the first thing, is like recognizing that every child is going to be different. Every youth is going to be different, with or without a diagnosis, right? We've got all different ways of learning, all different histories of how they've interacted with learning spaces or community spaces. And so for me, the first thing that's really helpful is, oftentimes these programs are running for a week at a time, or you get them for a couple days, or if you're lucky, maybe you get them for the whole summer. But it's usually like, I'm going to take a week here, then I'm going to go to this camp over there, then I'm going to go to that one, and mix it up. And so you're not going to be able to assess a learner's needs in 1 week. You're not going to be able to like figure out what they need and then test things out and then try it. And so your best resource is the individual and the family themselves, right? And so from the beginning, it's what information can I get from families and from children to set them up for success? Inviting the communication between caregivers and camp staff, so that they feel comfortable telling you about what needs might be there and strategies that work and the ways that they learn best. And so having that invitation early, so that families can tell you, you know what, my kid really loves when it's hands-on. My kid really responds well to visuals. My kid really is sensitive to noises and does well in quiet space. So you have that information and you can go with it, and you're not starting from zero. And maybe by Thursday, you've learned what the kid can do, but you only have Friday now to put that in place.
And so what you're saying is that it's the program that asks the question. So it's not just like, does your child have any special needs or special, allergies, especially like they kind of, a lot of camps will like just loop it all together and give you, 2 lines to respond. And it's hard to know what to say, or, so are you also training on the kinds of questions that those camps can ask parents to get that information?
Yeah, so some of the things we did in our camp, and again, it'll vary for different camps, but we asked, rather than what diagnoses do they have, right? Because we know they could check off autism.
Right.
What does that mean? Does that mean that they use a communication device? Does that mean that they're verbally fluent, but they have difficulty with transitions? Like, what does that actually mean? And so we suggest, rather than focusing on they have this diagnosis or something like that, that you ask things like, how do they communicate? What when they're having difficulty with an activity, what kinds of strategies do you use to help support them when they're sad or angry? Tell me about how they like to communicate. Tell me about how they like to be talked to. That type of information can be really helpful upfront.
I think that has been my personal experience, is that the camp, their first, the program will sort of, their first line of defense is just like, we don't have the resources to do that. But again, some of those shifts are so minor. And I think that's why asking the right questions up front can help them to see, that often it can be something very minor that has a big impact. These changes or the shifts that we're suggesting in these recreation programs sort of get framed as like only benefiting a few number of kids. And this is I know the answer to this, because this is what we do in Actua is, we're constantly saying, look, the improvements that we make for whether it's girls or, people from equity deserving communities, they're always beneficial to all of the kids. So could you talk just from this perspective, how that changes the impact for everyone?
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's quite a bit of inclusion research, right, around inclusion in schools, and how at the very least, like, even if you're super skeptical, it doesn't hurt the other kids. So It doesn't stop. So what? Forget anything else. Like, kids have a right to be engaged in these spaces, and nobody loses. So that's a great starting point, right? So even if it doesn't make things better, it's certainly not hurting anybody else. So why shouldn't that be the sort of default position? But I think there are benefits in addition to not harms. Um, you know, children learn, right, that differences are part of life, right? They're not something that sits outside of it. And so we all have to learn to, you're going to work with everybody. You're going to work with different groups. You're going to be in spaces with different people. And so inclusion to me really builds stronger empathy, builds leadership in youth, builds social skills, all of those kinds of things, because we see what it's like to support another individual, to learn from another individual, to see different ways that people learn and understand things. And then hopefully, you go out into the world and you carry that with you in your workplace, in your leadership positions, as you move on in life.
And I think it does actually some very practically, there's benefit to a lot of the things that matter to kids that don't do well in a very overstimulating camp environment, right? So like one of the things that I've often requested is like, could my child just eat in a quiet place at lunch? And then by the end of the week, there's like, they're like, actually, we've got like 8 kids who are choosing to eat in there. And they, their parents have said it's just been so beneficial for them to have a bit of some downtime during the day. And like, and it creates different conversations is what we've heard with camp staff as well. And certainly as Actua moves forward and we've, I think, as you know, recently launched a national program for youth with disabilities and we've always made huge efforts across the country. Our network has been so incredible at, whether it is physical accessibility or having assistance in the classroom and being able to support that, or just generally the instructors being aware of how to build safer, more inclusive spaces. We've done that. And I think your training has helped us with that in the past. We're just taking it up a notch to say, look, we're going to double down on this. We want to make sure that all youth can attend, an Actua network member camp and feel good about themselves and good about learning STEM. And, as we go forward and we look at those systemic changes that we want to make, I have 2 more questions. One is, can you paint a picture for us of what an inclusive summer program looks like? And then I'll ask my second question after that. So
sure.
What could it look like?
Yeah. So the camp we ran, it was an inclusive space and it was inclusive STEM. So they were working on robotics primarily throughout the program, 1 week long. We invited children and youth, regardless of diagnosis, but we intentionally, because we were interested in sort of intellectual developmental disabilities, we had a high proportion of individuals with support needs and with those diagnoses. So we were at about 50-50 ratio of individuals with a diagnosis reported from their parents, and with those without a diagnosis in that category, they may have had other diagnoses. And things that we incorporated into there. So we designed activities using universal design for learning. So that's thinking about multiple ways to engage in activity, multiple ways to participate, right? Multiple presentations. So not a single correct sort of way to do things. And also we talk about something that's called low floor and high ceiling. So you can enter, we have something that anybody can enter at, right? Doesn't matter who you are. We've got a way to enter this activity from the beginning, but the sky's the limit, right? The ceiling is high. If that's not enough for you, we've got layers that we can make it on top. And so the example is sort of, if we were building a tower, everybody can decide where to build the tower, doesn't matter who you are. We can all pick a spot to put it, right? But maybe then it gets more complicated. What can we build it out of? Can we connect the towers together? Can we like put a whole bunch of weight on it and see, right? And so the ceiling gets higher and higher. Can we make a hydraulic tower? Like we can get really complicated if that's something that's going to work for those individuals. But everybody can decide what to name the tower or what colors to make it or those kinds of things. So everybody has a way to contribute. So thinking about intentionally designed activities. We also incorporated aspects of social skills and social belonging into it. So every day we started with a 5-minute disability awareness training lesson. We talked about the strengths and challenges that participants had. We even had one kid tell like, what's the day that we're talking about ADHD? Because I want to talk about my domain. I want to teach people about it, what I experience. And then we also incorporated intentional social and belonging building activities in there. So we had things like buddy systems, and we taught them about how to handle disagreements, how to say no, you don't want to do things. And that was taught, those were all taught to everybody because, this group was the tween age. Like it doesn't, all tweens need to know about handling disagreements and saying no and, responding to criticism. Like those are just things that my colleagues need those lessons as well, right? So everybody needs that. So we had intentional thought about how do we foster belonging and friendship and socialness in those spaces. And then we just use sort of very basic, well-known inclusion kinds of strategies. So things like clear, predictable routines, expectations that are upfront and explicit, thinking about the environmental design, things like noise, things like transitions, downtime is important, intentionally creating space for that. And then my background, of course, in the behavior analysis world, we taught everybody about understanding behavior as communication. So when we have behavior that, that we might consider inappropriate or challenging in those spaces, how do we respond with support rather than removal? How do we understand how this child's needs are not being met? And how do we find a way to meet those needs in that moment?
And that's probably the biggest thing that is missing, is that understanding behavior as communication, and that most youth are just trying to communicate that they are not getting what they need to participate. It's
Absolutely
so key. I know that your plate is full with all the things to research, but I can only imagine how the impact that this would have on a whole system. So I think about kids that are in a program like that, kids that don't need the accommodations, but learning about these things for kids that do, and then going back into class, especially in the tween years where kids can be mean, with that level of understanding. So they're deepening their own empathy. That's going to translate into more acceptance in classrooms. And I mean, it really is important work. My last question is for the parents who are listening to this and who have signed their kids up for summer programs, hoping for the best, and, not necessarily sure of how to communicate or what to do. What is your number one advice for helping them to navigate this summer or moving forward generally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for parents, it's lots of sites have that they're committed to inclusion.
Yeah.
Of course, right? That's good. You should, and that, that should be, to me, yes, you should have a mission value, kind of statement that maybe thinks about that, or you've put that somewhere that you are. For parents, then the next step is thinking, what does that look like in practice rather than in principle? So I tend to like, places that are willing to have conversations, communicate with you about some of the strategies that they do take, or willingness to do that, right? Because some places maybe haven't thought about it or haven't got a plan until they've been asked about that. So thinking about what does that look like in practice, right? It's reasonable to ask sort of what supports exist, how decisions are made when a child needs additional structure or assistance. And the goal might not be perfection, but responsiveness and openness to collaboration. And that can sort of set you off on the right path, right? And planning ahead for that.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for all of this. The work is important. The help that you're going to certainly provide to the Actua network, but more broadly it's huge. And I thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much.